At 4:43 in the afternoon on the 7th of January 2021, a man in Chula Vista, California, sat in his house and sent an email to a stranger on the internet. He had never met the person he was writing to. He did not know their real name. He had found them online the way you might find someone to fix a laptop or walk a dog, and he had been paying them and others like them for 4 months. He was paying them to cast spells on his wife. 2 minutes after he sent that email, his wife walked through the front door of their home. A neighbor's security camera recorded her arriving. 4:45 in the afternoon. She parked, she got out, she went inside. No camera anywhere on that street ever recorded her coming out again. Her name was Maya Millete, everyone called her Maya. She was 39 years old. She worked as a civilian employee for the Department of Defense. She had 3 children. She has not been seen since. 5.5 years later, this month, a jury in San Diego County took less than 5 hours to decide what had happened to her. They did it without a body. They did it without a weapon. They did it without a confession, without a witness, and without a single person who could say they had seen Maya Millete die. What they had instead was 1,700 pages of emails. Because for 4 months, Larry Millete had been writing to people he believed could work magic. And he had been telling them things he could not tell anyone in his actual life. No friend, no relative, no priest, because the people he was writing to had no connection to him. No stake in his marriage, and no reason to remember his name. He told them everything. He told them he wanted his wife bound to him forever. Then he told them he wanted her punished. Then he told them he wanted her sick, so sick that she would end her life in a bed with nobody around her except him and the children. Then on the 31st of December, he asked one of them for an accident, a broken bone. And then, on the 7th of January, 2 minutes before she walked through that door for the last time, he sent one more. He also left one of them a 5-star review. Chula Vista sits at the bottom of California, about 7 miles from the Mexican border and 15 minutes south of downtown San Diego. It is the second largest city in the county, and it does not feel like a city at all. It feels like a very large suburb, wide streets, low houses, palm trees, garage doors, a Costco. The Millete family lived on a street called Paseo Los Gatos, in a hillside neighborhood of stucco homes with tile roofs. Larry and Maya had been married for 20 years. They had 3 children. On the 7th of January 2021, that marriage was in its final week, and both of them knew it. Here is what Maya Millete did that day, reconstructed from her phone, her messages, and the testimony of the people she spoke to. She was contacting divorce lawyers, not thinking about it. Not researching it, contacting them actively that day, making the arrangements that a person makes when they have finished deciding. She was also messaging a group of friends from work. They had a Facebook chat together. The group was called Work Besties, and what she told them was that she and Larry had argued and that he was threatening to take the children, all of them. That he wanted 100% custody. She used a specific word about her husband, relentless. At around 4:43 in the afternoon, Larry Millete sent his last email to a spellcaster. At around 4:45, a neighbor's camera recorded Maya arriving home. She goes into the house. At around 8:15 that evening, she sends a text message to one of her sisters. And at some point that night, she also messages her friends again, the same group chat. She tells them that she and Larry have just had an argument. She tells them he wants 100% custody of the children. That is the last thing Maya Millete is known to have said about her own life, that she had just fought with her husband and that he was trying to take her children. Read those 2 facts in the order they happen because the sequence is the case. In the afternoon, she contacts divorce lawyers. In the evening, they argue, and he tells her he will take the children. And a few hours after that, she stops existing on every system that records a human being. No phone, no card, no camera, no message, nothing ever again. That is the last confirmed contact any human being has with Maya Millete. And then the record stops being about what she did and starts being about what the street heard. Because a neighbor's security camera was running and it was recording audio. At some point that evening, it captured a sequence of 9 loud bangs. I want to be careful here and precise because this is a case where precision matters more than usual. Those 9 bangs sounded like gunshots. That is how they were described. But the FBI examined the recording and could not confirm that they were gunshots. They could not say what they were. The Bureau's analysis did not establish it either way. So this is not a fact that proves anything. It is a fact that sits in the file and does not go away. 9 bangs on a quiet residential street on the last evening anyone heard from Maya Millete. Then at around 10:30 that night, another neighbor noticed something. The Millete children were outside, playing. It was January, it was cold, it was a school night. and 3 young children were out in the dark at 10:30 in the evening. At approximately 1:25 in the morning on the 8th of January, Maya Millite's cell phone terminated all cellular connections. It has never been switched on again. It has never been found. 2 days later, on the 9th of January, her family reported her missing. The call was made by her sister, Mary Chris. And here is where this case immediately became something other than a missing persons report. Because when a 39-year-old woman disappears from her own home, there are broadly 3 possibilities: she left, someone took her, or she never left the house at all. The first one has a specific shape. A person who leaves takes things. They take a bag, a phone, charger, a passport, money. They use a bank card somewhere. They surface at a motel, at a friend's, at a bus station, on a camera 400 miles away. People who walk out of their lives leave a trail behind them because living costs money and money is traceable. Maya Millete left no trail at all. No withdrawals, no card transactions, no flights. No border crossing, no sighting. In more than 5 years, through a global manhunt, a nationally covered case. Her face on television and on flyers and on a Facebook page followed by tens of thousands of people. Not one confirmed sighting of Maya Millete anywhere on Earth. The second possibility, that somebody took her, has its own shape, and it also failed to match. Stranger abductions of adult women from inside their own homes are extraordinarily rare, and they are messy. They leave forced entry, or a disturbed scene, or a vehicle on a camera, or a ransom, or a body found within weeks. They do not typically involve a house where the children were home, the doors were intact, and nothing was reported missing, which left the third possibility. And the third possibility is not really a possibility at all, it is an address. And there is the other thing, the thing her family said from the first day and never stopped saying. She would not have left her children. The prosecutor who eventually tried this case put it to the jury in a single sentence that she repeated like a drumbeat through 8 weeks of trial. Maya Millete would not, could not, and did not leave her children. Before the spells, before the trial, before any of it, the woman, Maya Millete, was born in the Philippines. Her family called her Maya. She came to the United States, and by the time she disappeared, she had built the kind of life that does not make the news. A job, a house, a marriage, 3 children. A large and close extended family who saw each other constantly. She worked as a civilian employee for the Department of Defense. That is a serious job. It requires a background check, a security clearance, a record of reliability, the sort of position you do not hold for years if you are chaotic or unstable or prone to vanishing. She was 39, her favorite color was green. That detail matters, and I will come back to it, because 5.5 years later a courtroom full of people would wear it. Her sister Mary Chris was the one who called the police. That is worth stopping on for a second because of what it tells you about that family. Maya did not live alone in the world. She was one of a large group of siblings who spoke constantly, saw each other constantly, and knew each other's business. When she went quiet for 2 days, it was not a gap that could go unnoticed. It was an alarm. That is also why the defense's theory had to clear such a high bar. To believe that Maya Millete walked away, you have to believe she walked away from her sisters, her brother, her parents, her colleagues. Her friends, every one of them, and has maintained perfect silence towards all of them for more than 5 years, while watching from wherever she is her own face on the news. She had 3 children. And by every account given in that courtroom, by her sisters, her friends, her colleagues, and eventually by the jury, the children were the organizing fact of her entire life. This is the part that people outside the case sometimes struggle with, so let me put it plainly. The defense in this trial argued that Maya Millete walked away. That she left the house, left the marriage, left the children, and started again somewhere else under another name. That is a real thing that real people occasionally do, and it was the strongest card the defense had. The reason it did not work is that person after person after person got into the witness box and said the same thing in slightly different words. Not her, never, not those kids, her sister. Her friends, her colleagues. She was in the middle of leaving her husband, and leaving her husband meant keeping her children. That was the entire point. She was messaging friends about custody. She was contacting lawyers about custody. The thing she was most afraid of, the thing she said out loud in the last hours of her life, was that he would take the children away from her. You do not fight for full custody of 3 children on a Thursday afternoon and abandon them on a Thursday night. And there is a quieter argument underneath that one, which the prosecution made through witness after witness, and which is harder to dismiss than any single piece of forensic evidence. Ask yourself what it would take, not emotionally, practically. To vanish successfully in the United States in 2021, as a woman with no money, you would need somewhere to go and someone to take you there and a way to eat. You would need to never use a card. Never apply for work under your own name. Never renew a license, never see a doctor under your own insurance, never board a plane, never cross a border, never be pulled over. You would need to abandon your phone at 1:30 in the morning and never once, in 5.5 years, be tempted to switch it on. And you would need to do all of it while a nationally covered missing persons investigation, with the FBI and NCIS attached, went looking for you. People do disappear, it happens. But it is not a thing that happens by accident, and it is not a thing that happens without preparation, and Maya Millete's last recorded act was not preparing to run. It was contacting a divorce lawyer. Those are two completely different plans, you only need one of them. Now I have to tell you something about Maya Millete that the defense spent 8 weeks trying to make you feel a certain way about. Maya Millete had an affair. In 2020, her marriage had been failing for a long time. She had briefly moved out of the family home and gone to stay at her brother's house. And during that period, she began seeing another man, a coworker. That is true, it was in evidence, it was not in dispute. And I want to handle it exactly the way the prosecutor handled it, because in 8 weeks of trial, it was the single best thing anybody said in that courtroom. Standing in front of the jury in her closing argument, Deputy District Attorney Christy Bowles did not hide it, minimize it, or explain it away. She said Maya was a human being. She said Maya was flawed, she said Maya may have lied and Maya had an affair. And then she said it again, she was a human being, that is the whole thing. That is the entire moral architecture of this case in 3 sentences. Because there is a version of this story, and you will find it in the comment section of every article ever written about it, where the affair is the explanation. Where a jury is quietly invited to think, well, she cheated, so what exactly? There is no version of the law and no version of morality in which having an affair makes a person forfeit their life. There is no version in which it makes them less murdered. A woman who lies to her husband is a woman who lied to her husband. She is still a person who was alive on the 7th of January and has not been alive since. And here is the part that actually matters forensically rather than morally. Maya Millete's affair is not the reason she died. Maya Millete's decision to leave is the reason she died. Those are different things, and the difference is the entire case. The affair was in the summer, she was killed in January. What happened in between was that she stopped wavering and started making arrangements. Lawyers, custody, a plan, a future with her name on it and not his. That is what could not be permitted. There is one more piece of evidence about Maya that the prosecution put in front of the jury, and it is the quietest and the most damning. She had no money. She had no money to live on her own. No separate account with a life in it, no cash reserve to disappear into. The finances of that household were controlled, and they were not controlled by her. So when the defense asked the jury to believe that Maya Millete executed a secret escape, a new identity, a new city, 5.5 years of total silence, no card, no phone. No contact with a single one of the dozens of people who loved her, the prosecutor had a very short answer. She wasn't planning a great escape. She had plans for the future. They were just plans that involved staying exactly where she was with her children and without him. Larry Millete was 41 years old when he was arrested. He is 44 now. He and Maya had been married for 20 years, most of their adult lives. To understand what the San Diego County District Attorney's Office eventually proved, you have to understand that this was not a case about a single violent night. The prosecution's theory and the thing the jury said afterwards had convinced them was a pattern. The district attorney described it in 3 words: escalating control, obsession, and planning. Here is what that looked like in practice as presented in evidence. He tracked her whereabouts, her movements, where she was and when. He had access to her social media. Her accounts, her messages, the private conversations she was having with her friends about him. He controlled the money, which is why months later she had none of her own. I want to slow down on that third one, because financial control is the least dramatic item on any list like this, and it is almost always the most important. When one person in a marriage controls the money, what they actually control is the other person's options, not their feelings, their exits. A woman with her own account can leave on a Tuesday. A woman without one has to plan and save and hide it and wait and find somewhere to go, and work out how she will feed 3 children in the meantime. Financial control is not a symptom of a controlling marriage, it is the lock on the door. And it is the reason that 5 years later a prosecutor could stand in front of a jury and dismantle the defense's entire theory with a single flat sentence. She had no money to live on her own. He had made sure of it, and then his lawyers asked 12 people to believe she had used it to escape. Each of those, on its own, is something a controlling husband does. Together, they describe a particular kind of marriage, one in which one person can see everything and the other person can go nowhere. And through 2020, it was failing anyway. Maya moved out for a period and stayed at her brother's house. Then, in the summer of that year, something happened that the prosecutor placed at the center of everything that followed. Larry Millete found his wife in a car with another man. She was not living at home at the time. He found them, and he brought her back. That phrase was the prosecution's, and it is worth pausing on because of what it assumes. Not she came back, not they reconciled. He found her and he brought her back. From that point forward, the timeline of this case is a straight line. By the end of 2020, according to the prosecutor, Maya Millete had summoned the courage to divorce him and leave the marriage. Summon the courage, that was the phrase used in court, and it tells you what the previous 20 years had been like. And so the question that governs this entire case, the question the jury spent 8 weeks on, is a simple one. What does a man like that do when the control stops working? He did three things. They happened simultaneously over the same 4 months in the same house. The first was that he researched a poison. The second was that he began paying strangers on the internet to do supernatural harm to his wife. And the third is that on the 7th of January 2021, Maya Millete walked into that house and never walked out. We are going to take those in order. Poison hemlock is a plant. It grows wild across most of North America, in ditches and on roadsides, and most people walk past it without knowing what it is. It looks like an overgrown carrot top, white flowers in flat clusters, a hollow stem with purple blotches. It is one of the most poisonous plants on the continent. The active compound is a neurotoxin called coniine. What it does is straightforward and awful. It interferes with the signals between nerves and muscles. The body's muscles stop responding. Paralysis begins at the extremities and moves inward. The person remains conscious. Eventually, it reaches the muscles used for breathing. This is the poison that killed Socrates. It has been known for 2,500 years. The prosecution told the jury that Larry Millete spent months researching it. Not a search, not a curiosity, months. And when investigators searched the Millete house, they found a glass vial. Inside it, poison hemlock. I want to be exact about what this does and does not prove because it is not what people assume. There is no evidence that Maya Millete was poisoned. Her body has never been found, so no toxicology exists, and none ever will unless she is. Nobody testified that she ingested anything. What the hemlock proves is something different, and in a circumstantial case, something arguably worse. It proves preparation. A man does not spend months researching a neurotoxin, and then obtain that neurotoxin and then store it in a glass vial in his home by accident. There is no innocent version of that sequence. You cannot stumble into it. Every step requires a decision, and the decisions took months. And now hold the hemlock next to the emails because they were happening at the same time, the same autumn. The same kitchen, the same man at the same desk. In one browser tab, he is researching what a plant does to the human nervous system. In another, he is writing to a stranger asking them to make his wife so ill that she cannot leave her bed. Those are not two different plans. And there is a third thing the hemlock tells you, which is about timing. Poison is not a weapon of rage. Nobody poisons someone in an argument. Poison is the method of a person who has thought about the problem in advance, decided on an outcome, and then gone looking for a mechanism, often over weeks or months, often with research. Often quietly. It is also historically the method chosen by people who want the death to look like something else. That is the entire appeal of it. A shooting is unambiguous, and illness is not. And remember what he had been asking the spellcasters for during exactly the same period. Not a car crash, not an intruder, sickness, deterioration, a woman in a bed getting worse. Those are the same wish pursued through two different doors, one of them chemical, one of them supernatural by a man who did not much care which one opened, as long as one of them did. In September of 2020, Larry Millete began contacting people online who advertised themselves as spellcasters. Some of them describe what they do as spiritual guidance. Some practice Wicca. Some are, by the frank admission of one who testified in this trial, simply running a scam, taking money from desperate people over the internet and providing nothing whatsoever. It does not matter which. That is the thing to hold on to for the next 10 minutes. Whether any of these people had any power at all is completely irrelevant to this case. What matters is what Larry Millete asked them for. Because a man's requests are a record of his intentions, and Larry Millete made those requests in writing from his own accounts over 4 months and paid for them with money that could be traced. An investigator from the district attorney's office testified to more than 1,700 pages of communications. The total amount paid was $1,154.05. I am going to take you through those 4 months the way the jury saw them in order. September 2020. The first emails are in their way ordinary, sad but ordinary. A man whose marriage is collapsing, reaching for anything. He asks for a powerful love spell. He wants his wife bound to him. Forever. He wants her to stop, in his words, hurting the family any further. Read that on its own and it is almost pitiable. A frightened man buying hope from the internet. If the emails had stopped in September, this would be a story about grief. October and November, the emails come faster and the requests change. He asks the casters to give her the worst nightmares. He writes that she needs to be punished. That is the hinge. That is the exact point in this record where the thing he wants stops being her love and becomes her suffering. Nothing else in the file changes at that moment. Same man, same house, same marriage, same 3 children asleep upstairs. But somewhere between September and October, the goal quietly moved. He no longer wanted her to come back, he wanted her to hurt. There is another set of emails running alongside these and they are aimed at somebody else entirely, the man Maya had been seeing. Maya Millete asked the casters to have him banished, hexed, punished. That man's partner was pregnant at the time and Maya Millete's requests extended to the unborn child. December 2020. By late December the requests have escalated again and the language is no longer about emotions at all. It is about a body. He asks that Maya be kept sick, not briefly, not as a lesson. He asks that she be kept so sick that she would be on her deathbed and that when she reached the end there would be nobody around her. Nobody except him and the children. Sit with the specificity of that request for a moment, because it is not the request of a man fantasizing vaguely about revenge. It is a scene. It has a location, a cast, and an ending. He has pictured the room. He has decided who is standing in it. He wants to be there at the end, and he wants everyone who loves her, her sisters, her friends, her brother whose house she fled to be somewhere else. December 31st, 2020, New Year's Eve. He asks one of the casters for an accident or a broken bone. That is a request for physical injury by a specific mechanism, not illness now impact. Something that happens to a person in a car or on a staircase or on a curb. January 7, 2021, 4:43 in the afternoon. He sends his last email about his wife to a spellcaster. 2 minutes later, she comes home. There is one more thing in that file, and it is the detail that traveled around the world when this case broke, because it is the detail nobody can quite process. Maya Millete left a review for one of the spellcasters. Written the way you would write about a driver or a takeaway or a plumber, he said she was kind, professional, courteous. He noted that his casting had not manifested yet, but that he was really hoping and counting on it. 5 stars. One of the attorneys who worked with Maya's family described reading it and thinking of a food delivery, an Uber ride. Oh, 5 stars, good job, spellcaster. And then he said the thing that actually explains why this evidence was so lethal in a courtroom. He's not quite as smart as he thinks he is. Because that is what the 1,700 pages really are. They are not proof of witchcraft. Nobody in that courtroom argued that a spell had ever worked or could. They are a diary. A 4-month, date-stamped, itemized, paid-for diary of one man's intentions towards his wife, written in his own words. Escalating in a straight line from bind her to me to punish her to let her die with only me in the room, and ending at 4:43 on the afternoon of the 7th of January. 2 minutes before she walked through the door and out of the world. He wrote it all down. He wrote it down because he believed he was talking to people who were not really there. One of the spellcasters testified. His name was Frank Peavy, and he came into that courtroom and sat in the witness box and explained what he does, which he described as providing spiritual guidance, something he had learned about from his wife, who practices Wicca. He read out the messages he had received from a man in Chula Vista in the months before that man's wife vanished. And under cross-examination, the defense went after him, as any defense would, trying to establish that people who sell spells online are frauds taking money from the vulnerable. What happened next was one of the strangest moments of the trial because Peavy agreed, emphatically. He told the court that in his opinion the vast majority of people offering these services are running a complete scam, that the internet is a place of dishonesty, that they simply do not care and only want the money. The judge called a 15-minute break, but notice what that exchange actually established because the defense had walked straight into it. If the spellcasters were frauds, then nothing supernatural ever happened. No spell was ever cast, nothing was ever sent. Which means the 1,700 pages are not a record of an attempted magical attack. They are a record of a man's mind, uncontaminated, nothing in that file did anything to anybody. Every word in it exists purely as evidence of what Larry Millete wanted at the moment he typed it, and what he wanted, in dated sequence across 4 months, was for his wife to be bound. Then punished, then made ill, then broken, then dead in a room with only him in it. The fraud does not weaken the evidence, it purifies it. Investigators also photographed something inside the house: an altar, candles, offerings, the apparatus of the rituals he had been paying for. In blood, so that is the 4 months before. Now the night itself and what can actually be established about it, which is less than people assume and more than enough. Start with what the cameras show. Chula Vista in 2021 is a neighborhood with doorbell cameras, security systems. The ordinary surveillance apparatus of a modern American suburb, pointing in every direction, recording almost continuously. At 4:45 in the afternoon on the 7th of January, that apparatus recorded Maya Millete arriving home. And then's nothing. No camera on that street in any direction ever recorded her leaving. Not on foot, not in a car, not that night, not the next day, not ever. Police and prosecutors have said there is no evidence to suggest she was alive after that date. Then the audio. 9 loud bangs captured by a neighbor's camera. They sounded like gunshots. The FBI could not confirm it. That analysis never resolved, and the prosecution never claimed it had. So the honest position is this: nobody can tell you what those 9 sounds were. They are unexplained, they are on the recording, and they happened on the last night of Maya Millete's life. Then the children. At around 10:30 that night, a neighbor saw the Millete children outside, playing in the dark in the cold on a school night. Nobody in that trial could tell the jury why. But everyone in that courtroom understood what a parent does when they need 3 children out of a house for a while, and cannot explain why, and it is January and it is night. Then the phone. At about 1:25 in the morning on the 8th of January, Maya Millete's cell phone terminated all cellular connections. Not switched off in a normal way that leaves a trail. Terminated. And then gone, never located, never activated, never found in more than 5 years of searching by the Chula Vista Police Department, the FBI, and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. And then the investigation, which took 9 months before anyone was arrested and 5 years before anyone was tried. The Chula Vista Police Department ran it, with the FBI and NCIS assisting. It generated the volume of material that those numbers imply: 60 witnesses, hundreds of exhibits, 5 years of forensic and digital work. In May of 2021, a gun violence restraining order was obtained against Larry Millete. In October of 2021, 9 months after Maya vanished, he was arrested and charged with her murder. He was also charged with unlawful possession of an assault weapon, a count that would remain unresolved and would eventually delay his sentencing. He pleaded not guilty. He has said repeatedly and consistently that he is innocent, and then the case stalled for years. In 2022, his own defense attorney declared a doubt as to whether he was mentally competent to stand trial, which halted proceedings entirely until he was found competent and the case was reinstated. Maya's family waited. Her 3 children were placed in the custody of her sister. Her family organized searches, vigils, prayer hikes, a Facebook page called Help Find Maya. Every year on the 7th of January, they marked another anniversary of the last day anyone saw her, and every year in May, they marked a birthday she was not there for. The trial did not begin until 2026. I want to spend a few minutes on the part of this story that almost never makes it into a documentary because it has no drama in it. It is just time. Maya Millete disappeared in January of 2021. Her husband was convicted in July of 2026, 5.5 years. For the first 9 months, nobody was arrested. That is not a criticism. A no-body case has to be built brick by brick, and the Chula Vista Police Department was working it alongside the FBI and NCIS. But from the outside, from inside that family, 9 months is 9 months. Her sisters organized searches. Volunteers walked canyons and hillsides in the San Diego heat. There were vigils. There were prayer hikes. Her family set up a Facebook page called Help Find Maya and posted to it, week after week, year after year, appeals, anniversaries, photographs, requests for information. And eventually invitations to birthday celebrations for a woman who was not there. In May of 2021, a gun violence restraining order was obtained against Larry Millete. In October of 2021, he was arrested, and then the case simply stopped. In 2022, his own defense attorney declared a doubt as to whether he was mentally competent to stand trial. That is a legitimate and important part of the legal system, and I want to be fair about it. A person cannot be tried if they cannot understand the proceedings or assist in their own defense. It is a protection that exists for good reasons and it is not a trick, but its effect in this case was that everything halted. The preliminary hearing, 3 weeks of evidence that was about to be presented, did not happen. A competency hearing was scheduled instead. Proceedings were suspended entirely until he was found competent and the criminal case was reinstated. Then there were more delays, a change of venue request, readiness conferences. A trial date set for January 2026, 5 years after she vanished, that then moved again. Try to hold what that is like from the other side of the courtroom. Every one of those hearings is a day off work. Every one is a drive to a courthouse and a wait on a hard bench, and a room where you might see the man you believe killed your sister, and then a drive home in which nothing has been resolved. Her family did that for years, and in the middle of it, 3 children were growing up. They were young when their mother went into that house and did not come out. They were placed in the custody of Maya's sister, the same sister who had made the first phone call to the police, who had organized the searches, who had run the Facebook page. So she raised them. Through the pandemic, through the arrest, through the competency proceedings and the delays and the change of venue and the 8-week trial, in which she herself testified during the first week and had to talk. In front of a room of strangers and cameras about her sister. Every anniversary of the 7th of January came around again, 5 of them. Every year in May there was a birthday. There is a photograph the family shared at one point, from a prayer vigil inviting people to come and mark what would have been Maya's 44th birthday. She was 39 when she disappeared. That is what 5 years looks like, not a montage, a number that keeps going up for somebody who stopped. The trial of Larry Millete began in Chula Vista in the spring of 2026, more than 5 years after his wife disappeared. It ran for roughly 8 weeks, more than 60 witnesses, hundreds of exhibits. Judge Enrique Camarena presiding, Deputy District Attorney Christy Bowles for the people, and it was, from the first day, one of the hardest kinds of case a prosecutor can bring. Understand the problem the state had. In an ordinary murder trial, the fact of a death is not in dispute. There is a body, there is a cause of death. The argument is about who and why and whether it was intended, but the killing itself is established before anyone opens their mouth. Christy Bowles did not have that. She had to prove first that a woman was dead with no body, no remains, no forensic confirmation of death of any kind, and only then could she start proving who had killed her. That is why this case took 5 years to reach a courtroom, and it is why the defense's position could be stated in 4 words. No body, no murder. The law does not actually require a body. Bowles told the jury that directly. Murder can be proved by circumstantial evidence, and it has been many times. But she also knew what she was up against because juries are human. An attorney and author who followed this case from the beginning made the point precisely. She had sat through 2 no-body trials. In one, the jury convicted. In the other, it hung because 2 jurors could not shake the belief that the victim might still be alive. That is the whole battlefield, not did he do it, but is she definitely dead? So the prosecution built its case in layers. The motive layer, a marriage ending, a woman leaving, a man who could not permit it. The tracking, the social media access, the financial control. 20 years, and then the summer she was found in another man's car and brought home. The intention layer, 1,700 pages, 4 months, $1,154.05. Bind her, punish her, sicken her, break her bones. And months of research into a neurotoxin with a vial of it in the house. The opportunity layer, she goes in at 4:45 and never comes out. 9 unexplained bangs, 3 children outside at 10:30 at night. A phone that dies at 1:25 in the morning and is never found again. And here is why those layers mattered in that particular order. A jury in a no-body case is not really being asked to follow a chain of proof. They are being asked to compare 2 stories and decide which one a reasonable person can actually believe. Story 1, a man who had spent 4 months paying strangers to make his wife sick. Break her bones and leave her dying alone with him, who had researched a neurotoxin for months and kept a vial of it in his house. Killed her on the night she told her friends he was threatening to take the children. Story 2, that same woman on that same night with no money walked out of her house, past every camera on the street, over a fence, down a drainage ditch. Abandoned 3 children she was in the middle of fighting for, and has since maintained flawless silence for more than 5 years while her face was broadcast across 2 countries. Both stories account for the fact that Maya Millete is not here, only one of them accounts for the emails. And the absence layer, which is the one that actually closes it. No withdrawals, no transactions, no sightings, no contact, no trace for 5.5 years. From a woman with no money to disappear on and 3 children she would not leave. Bowles spent nearly 3 hours on her closing argument. She told the jury that when it became apparent Maya was determined to divorce him, he murdered her. She said Maya was just telling him, "We are done, I want a life without you," and that he would have none of it. She told them the only reasonable conclusion was that Maya Millete was dead, and that the defendant had killed her. And she said the sentence that the whole 8 weeks had been building towards. She wasn't planning a great escape. At the defense table as this was happening, something was noticed by the reporters in the room. Larry Millete did not visibly weep, but he asked a bailiff for a box of tissues. "Now I want to do the thing that true crime almost never does. I want to make his case, not as a formality, not as a throat clear before the guilty verdict. I want to lay out fairly and at length the reasons 12 people in Chula Vista could have walked into that room and come back with not guilty, because those reasons were real. They were argued by serious lawyers, and in a different room with different people they might have worked. Reason 1, and it is enormous, there is no body, not a partial recovery, not remains that were too degraded to test, nothing. In 5.5 years with the FBI, NCIS, the Chula Vista Police Department, cadaver dogs, searches of canyons and landfills and desert. Thousands of hours and a family that never stopped looking, Maya Millete has not been found. And so every single element of this prosecution rests on an inference. Not on a fact, on an inference. She must be dead because she has not appeared. That is a strong inference. It is not the same thing as knowledge. Reason 2, nobody can say what happened in that house. There is no witness. Not one person testified that they saw a struggle, heard a confession, or observed Larry Millete do anything to his wife. There is no murder weapon because there is no established cause of death. There is no forensic evidence of a killing inside that home that anyone could put in front of the jury and say, "This is where she died." The 9 bangs, the FBI could not confirm they were gunshots. The hemlock in the vial, no toxicology exists and never can. The children outside at 10:30, nobody could say why, and children are outside at odd hours for 100 ordinary reasons. Every single one of those facts is consistent with murder, not one of them requires it. Reason 3, the defense had a mechanism. This is the part people forget when they hear the verdict, and it was the last thing the jury heard from the defense. The prosecution's strongest physical claim was that Maya never left because the cameras never saw her leave. So the defense hired a private investigator and put him in the witness box, and he testified to something specific and checkable. That it was possible to leave that property without appearing on any neighborhood camera, over the backyard fence and out along a nearby drainage ditch. Not theoretical, demonstrated. And if that is true, then the single most powerful fact in the prosecution's case, she went in and never came out, becomes instead, she went in and no camera recorded her leaving. Those are not the same sentence. One is a wall, the other is a gap. Reason 4, the affair and the man. Maya Millete was having a relationship with a coworker. Larry Millete had discovered it. Larry Millete had, as we now know from the emails, spent months directing rage at that man specifically. Now, there is an obvious defense available there. Another man, another set of motives. Somebody else in her life who was not her husband. The defense tried to run it. The judge would not let them. Judge Camarena ruled that the involvement of that man did not meet the legal standard for what is called third-party culpability evidence, the rule that stops a defense from simply pointing at a stranger and inviting a jury to speculate. He found no direct or circumstantial evidence linking him to Maya's killing, and the reason was solid. According to testimony from the man himself and from his former wife, he was at a hospital between the 7th and the 10th of January 2021 because his wife had gone into labor. And their child was born. That is about as complete an alibi as a human being can have. But here is what the defense said next, outside the presence of the jury, and this is a serious argument, not a technicality. They argued that they had been unfairly prevented from questioning investigators about how that alibi had been confirmed. That they were barred from probing whether the police had done that work properly. Sit with what that means. Their objection was not he did it. Their objection was, we were not permitted to test whether anybody checked. In a case built entirely on the elimination of alternatives, being blocked from examining how one alternative was eliminated is not nothing. Reason 5, the spells prove a state of mind, not an act. And this is the argument that should have worked. Everything in the 1700 pages is real. Nobody disputed a word of it, but consider what it actually is. It is a man buying magic on the internet. Which means it is a man who believed genuinely, expensively over 4 months, leaving reviews like a customer, that his problem could be solved by somebody else, supernaturally. Without him having to do anything at all. That is not the profile of a planner. That is the profile of somebody so passive, so magical in his thinking, so unwilling to act, that he outsourced his wife's fate to strangers on a website and then sat waiting for it to manifest. A man plotting a murder does not need a spellcaster. And the requests themselves, nightmares, sickness, an accident, a broken bone, are read a certain way, a catalog of things he wanted the universe to do so that he would not have to. Ugly. Pitiable evidence of a man in a very dark place, evidence of a killing. He never asked anyone to kill her. Reason 6, 5.5 years is a very long time. This one is rarely argued out loud, but it sits under every nobody case and any competent defense will use it. Evidence decays, memories move. A witness who testifies in 2026 about a conversation in 2020 is not lying when their account has shifted. That is simply what human memory does over 6 years, particularly when the person has. In the intervening time, read the coverage, seen the theories, spoken to the family, and formed a settled belief about what happened. Between Maya Millete's disappearance and the verdict, there was an arrest, a competency proceeding that suspended the case entirely, a change of venue application, a pandemic, and multiple postponements. 60 witnesses took that stand. Every one of them was remembering across a gap of 5 years or more, in a case where the community had long since made up its mind, and where the defendant's face had been on local news for half a decade. The defense does not have to prove that any particular witness was wrong. It only has to ask the jury to notice how much of this case was assembled out of recollection, long after the fact, by people who already knew the ending. And underneath all six, the reasonable doubt argument itself. The defense's job was never to prove Maya was alive. It was not to name another killer or explain the phone or account for the bangs. It was to raise a doubt in one juror. That is a genuinely low bar, and it is low on purpose, because the alternative, a system that convicts on strong suspicion, is a system that eventually convicts the innocent. The jurors in this case said afterwards that they took that seriously, that they owed Larry Millete the presumption of innocence and started there. Their position was that the prosecution had not definitively proved that Maya Millete was dead, and had not definitively proved that Larry Millete killed her. And that in the absence of a body, a weapon, a witness, a confession, or a cause of death, 12 people were being asked to send a man to prison for the rest of his life on the strength of a pattern. That was the case, that is what the jury had to get past. And for 8 weeks in a courtroom in Chula Vista, nobody could tell you with certainty which way it was going to go. The jury got the case in July of 2026. 12 people, 8 weeks of testimony behind them, 60 witnesses, hundreds of exhibits, a case with no body. They deliberated for just under 5 hours. On the 9th of July 2026, a crowd began to gather outside the courtroom in Chula Vista as word spread that a verdict was coming. Maya's family, Larry's family. Officers from the Chula Vista Police Department, including the acting chief, who had waited outside and wished the prosecutor luck. Maya's sister Maricris, the one who had made the first phone call to the police 5.5 years earlier, walked in arm with her husband, crying. The judge reminded the room that however emotional the day was, there was still business to handle afterwards. Then the foreperson stood up and the room went completely silent, guilty. First-degree murder, unanimous, applause and cheering broke out in the courthouse. Maya's supporters had come dressed in green, her favorite color, and they had been coming to that building in green for weeks. Afterwards, one of the jurors spoke to a local news crew. Her name was Beverly Feldman, and what she said was not triumphant. She said there was no winner that day. She said they had owed it to Larry Millete to assume he was innocent until the prosecution proved otherwise, and that the prosecution had done exactly that. She described her heart pounding as the verdict was read. And she explained what the 8 weeks had actually been about, in terms that had nothing to do with law. That all 12 of them wanted to be able to go to sleep that night knowing there was no question in any of their minds. Not just that he had done it, that it was first degree, premeditated, planned, not a night that got out of hand. That distinction, first degree rather than second, is worth understanding, because it is the difference between two completely different findings about a human being. Second-degree murder is an intentional killing without premeditation, a night that escalates, a moment where something breaks. First-degree murder requires that the jury find the killing was premeditated and deliberate, that it was decided in advance. 12 people looked at 4 months of emails escalating from love spells to broken bones, at months of research into a neurotoxin, at a vial of poison hemlock in a family home, and at a woman who walked through her front door 2 minutes after the last of those emails was sent, and they concluded unanimously that this was not a night that got out of hand. It was a plan that finally ran out of patience. Larry Millete faces 25 years to life in state prison. No sentencing date was set that day because of the unresolved assault weapon charge that had to be dealt with first. He was due back in court the following month for a status conference. The district attorney, Summer Stephan, said that justice had finally been served for Maya, and for everyone who had carried the weight of her absence for more than 5 years. She said their hearts were with Maya's family and friends, and especially with her 3 children. The prosecutor, Christy Bowles, said something more restrained and more honest. She said that while the verdict was significant, May is still missing. The Chula Vista police chief said the same thing in different words. That the day gave a little bit of justice for Maya and her family, but that she is still missing and that they would keep looking. And Maricris Druilet, standing in front of the cameras, thanked the investigators, the prosecutors and the journalists who had followed her sister's case for 5.5 years. Then she said, justice has been served today, but we still have the second step to go through. Here is what I keep coming back to. Larry Millete was not by any measure a criminal mastermind. The evidence in this case is overwhelming precisely because he generated so much of it himself, 1,700 pages of it, itemized, dated, paid for by card, and reviewed like a takeaway order. He wrote down his intentions towards his wife in escalating detail for 4 months, and then handed that record to the police by simply having a computer. And the reason he did it is the thing worth understanding. He thought he was talking to nobody. That is what those spellcasters actually were in the end, not sorcerers, not accomplices. Not even really strangers, they were a confessional with no priest in it. A place where a man could say the things he could not say to his friends, his family, his church, or his children. I want her to suffer, I want her sick. I want her to die with only me in the room, and be met not with horror but with an invoice. They were the only listeners he could find who would never judge him and never report him. He believed that made them safe. And so the case that convicted him was not built by a detective who outwitted him. It was built by a man who could not stop telling somebody what he wanted, and who chose as his confidants the only people on earth who kept receipts. But I don't want to end on him. Because there is a version of this story that is about spellcasters and Hemlock and a 5-star review, the strange, lurid, unforgettable furniture of it. That version travels well. It is the version that put this case on television in 3 countries. It is not the story. The story is a 39-year-old woman who worked for the Department of Defense, who had 3 children whose favorite color was green, and who spent the last afternoon of her life doing something quietly and enormously brave. She was making arrangements to leave, she was contacting lawyers, she was telling her friends. She was frightened, she said so in writing hours before she disappeared. She said he was relentless and that he was threatening to take her children. She had no money of her own because that had been arranged years earlier. She had every practical reason to stay, and she was leaving anyway. That is the thing that got her killed, not the affair. Not a fight, the decision. Her sister raised her 3 children. Her family walked canyons and hillsides for 5.5 years. They held vigils on the 7th of January and birthdays in May. And they built a page called Help Find Maya, and they kept it running through a pandemic, through competency hearings, through delay after delay after delay for more than half a decade. And then 12 strangers in Chula Vista listened for 8 weeks and took 5 hours to tell them they had been right the entire time. But Maya Millete is still out there somewhere. That is the second step. That is what her sister meant standing in front of those cameras on the day they won. A conviction is a finding about a man. It is not a place in the ground with a name on it. It is not a funeral. It is not the thing you can drive to on a Sunday. Her children are teenagers now. They have grown up in the custody of their aunt, in the long shadow of a question that a verdict does not answer. Larry Millete will spend the rest of his life, in all likelihood, in a California prison. He has said from the beginning that he is innocent, and he has never told anybody where she is. He is the only person alive who knows. And that is the last cruelty of this particular case, the one that separates it from most murders. In an ordinary conviction, the truth and the remedy arrive together. The state proves what happened, and in proving it produces the person, the place, the account. The family gets an answer and a body. Here the state proved everything except the one fact her family actually needed. 12 people established beyond a reasonable doubt that Maya Millete was murdered by her husband, and not one of them could say where she is. The verdict is complete, the story is not. So the case is closed, and it isn't. The people who loved her got the verdict. They are still waiting for the second step. On the 7th of January 2021, at 4:45 in the afternoon, Maya Millete walked into her own house. Somebody knows how she left it.